Step into the heart of the medieval world, where the cold winds of winter swept across vast landscapes of snow and silence. The towering stone castles, once symbols of strength and power, now stood as frozen fortresses, their thick walls echoing with the faint crackle of fire and the low murmur of life within. Winter in the Middle Ages was not merely a season. It was a trial of endurance, a test of patience, and a measure of human ingenuity. Inside these formidable walls, men and women fought daily not against armies, but against the bitter cold. As the first snow began to fall, life within the castle shifted into a new rhythm. Farmers brought in their last harvests, animals were herded into shelters, and the castle gates closed tightly for the long, unforgiving months ahead. Every inhabitant of the castle, from the noble lord and his family to the lowliest servant, knew that survival depended on careful preparation. The castle's architecture itself was both a blessing and a curse. Built of stone to resist siege and fire, it also absorbed the freezing chill of winter. The walls were thick, sometimes more than 2 meters wide, but insulation was almost non-existent. To combat the cold, people relied on large hearths and fireplaces, where wood burned constantly, filling great halls with warmth and the smoky scent of oak. Yet, despite the fires, the air often remained cold enough for one's breath to linger like mist. In the great hall, where most of the castle's daily life unfolded, tapestries and heavy draperies hung from the walls, not just as decoration, but as a shield against drafts. Beneath the tables, rushes or straw were spread across the floor, changed occasionally to mask the smells of daily life. The warmth of the fire and the closeness of bodies gathered together offered comfort, though true warmth was a rare luxury. Servants rose before dawn to tend to the fires, hauling wood through the icy courtyards, their breath white against the morning air. Gathering firewood was one of the most vital and exhausting winter duties. Wood had to be stored dry, protected from the snow, for a damp log could smolder and die rather than burn. Throughout the castle, the rhythmic sounds of chopping and crackling became the heartbeat of winter survival. Food, too, became a matter of foresight and preservation. The abundance of summer was long gone, replaced by salted meats, smoked fish, and stored grains. In the castle kitchens, cooks worked tirelessly to make simple meals stretch across the months. They simmered thick stews in iron pots hung above the fire, mixing preserved meats with whatever vegetables had lasted through the cold. The scent of garlic, onions, and herbs filled the air, offering warmth to both the body and the spirit. Water was another challenge. Streams often froze solid, and wells could become dangerous to use in icy weather. Snow was collected and melted over the fire, but it required time and constant tending. The people of the castle learned to conserve what little they had, reusing and rationing as the weeks of winter dragged on. For the noble family, life inside the castle was more comfortable, yet still far from luxurious by modern standards. They had access to fur-lined garments, thick wool cloaks, and private chambers with small fireplaces. Candles made from tallow or beeswax flickered in iron holders, casting a warm golden light on stone walls. The lord and lady would often gather near the hearth, surrounded by family and trusted retainers, listening to minstrels or reading from illuminated manuscripts. Meanwhile, servants and guards endured the cold in simpler quarters. Many slept in shared rooms or near the kitchen, where the lingering heat from the day's cooking offered some relief. Blankets were few, and sleeping fully clothed was common. Every morning began with the same routine: rekindling fires, checking supplies, and ensuring that the noble family was comfortable before tending to their own needs. Outside, the world lay silent under snow. The castle courtyard was a landscape of white, where footprints quickly vanished under new flakes. Horses were blanketed and kept in stables thick with hay, their breath rising like steam in the cold air. The blacksmith's forge, one of the few warm spots outside the main hall, glowed faintly in the twilight, its coals stoked to repair tools and weapons even through the deepest frost. The rhythm of castle life in winter was one of patience, labor, and quiet endurance. Each day blended into the next, measured by the slow passage of light through narrow windows and the steady crackle of fire. It was a season that tested not only the body but the spirit, a reminder that even behind the strongest walls, nature still reigned supreme. The fire was the heart of every medieval castle during the cold winters. Without it, life inside those stone walls would have been unbearable. Yet maintaining warmth was a constant struggle. Fireplaces were grand but inefficient. Much of the heat vanished up the chimney, leaving only a faint glow to fight the freezing air. In some rooms, braziers, large metal bowls filled with glowing embers, were used to warm small spaces. Servants carried these portable heat sources from room to room, their flickering light guiding them through the dim corridors. In the great hall, where most of the household gathered, a massive central hearth burned day and night. The flames offered more than warmth, they provided a sense of unity, a place where everyone, from the lord to the lowest servant, could gather for meals and brief moments of companionship. The smoke often lingered thickly beneath the high vaulted ceilings, stinging the eyes and leaving the air heavy, yet it was a small price to pay for survival. To stay warm, people relied on layer upon layer of clothing. Wool was the most common and valuable material. It insulated well, stayed warm even when damp, and was available in abundance. Nobles wore finely woven wool dyed in rich colors, while peasants dressed in coarser, undyed cloth. Linen undergarments provided a softer layer beneath, while cloaks, hoods, and gloves completed the ensemble. Fur, too, was treasured during the winter months. The wealthiest households had access to fur trims from fox, squirrel, or even ermine, while simpler folk used sheepskin and rabbit pelts for warmth. Shoes and boots were lined with straw or cloth to keep out the cold from the stone floors. Some even stuffed dried moss or hay inside for extra insulation. It was said that in the coldest winters, people would sleep fully dressed, wrapping their cloaks tightly and using their own body heat as the final layer of defense. Despite the hardships, the castle remained a center of community and life. Winter was a time when travel slowed, and the world outside seemed to sleep beneath a blanket of snow. Within the castle walls, social life took on a new rhythm. Feasts were held to celebrate holy days, births, or victories long past. Though food was simple, the atmosphere was rich with laughter, music, and the smell of roasted meat. The warmth of fellowship was often the best shield against the cold. Entertainment in winter was essential to keep spirits high. Minstrels played songs on lutes and flutes, their melodies echoing softly through the stone halls. Storytellers shared tales of heroes and saints, while the younger members of the household played board games made of carved wood and bone. Even the servants found small joys, singing during chores, carving small trinkets, or simply gathering around the kitchen fire to talk about dreams of spring. For the lord of the castle, winter brought a slower pace of life, but also new responsibilities. He had to ensure his people were fed, the fires were maintained, and the supplies would last until the thaw. The steward kept close watch over the stores of grain and salted meat, while the cook rationed every portion carefully. Mistakes could mean hunger before the end of winter. The lady of the castle oversaw domestic life, ensuring that clothing and bedding were mended and that the sick were cared for. Illnesses spread easily in the damp, smoky air, and the lack of fresh vegetables made health fragile. Herbal remedies prepared by healers or wise women were in constant use. Infusions of thyme, sage, or honeyed water to soothe coughs and fevers. The walls of the castle could feel confining during those months. Many people experienced a quiet weariness, the long nights and cold days pressing heavily upon the spirit. To counter this, faith played a vital role. Daily prayers, church services, and moments of reflection offered comfort and a reminder of hope. The chapel, though often as cold as any other room, glowed softly with the light of candles, their flames trembling like whispers of warmth and devotion. Outside the castle, the land slept under frost. Peasants in nearby villages huddled in their cottages, surviving on what they had stored before the snow came. Smoke rose from small chimneys like threads of gray against the white. The bond between the castle and its surrounding lands remained strong. Lords provided protection, and villagers in turn supplied goods and loyalty. Winter reminded all of their interdependence, the fragile balance that kept life moving through the harshest months at night. Silence ruled. The world outside the walls was black and still, save for the occasional cry of a wolf or the moan of wind against the battlements. Guards patrolled with torches, steps echoing across frozen stone. Inside, the fires dimmed to glowing embers, casting long shadows across sleeping forms. And in that stillness, time itself seemed to. Each breath of warmth a quiet victory against the cold that never truly left. As winter deepened and the world outside lay silent beneath snow and ice, life within the castle took on a slower, more inward rhythm. Travel ceased, the field slept, and the castle became its own small world. a fortress of stone and firelight surrounded by a sea of frost. But even in these quiet months there was no true rest. Every person, from the highest noble to the youngest servant, had duties to perform to keep the household alive and orderly. Maintenance was an unending task. The cold tested every part of the castle's structure. Doors swelled with moisture, iron hinges froze, and cracks appeared in the walls where frost bit deepest. Masons and carpenters worked even through the chill, repairing what they could. They wrapped themselves in thick cloaks, their hands red and raw as they hammered and sealed. Buckets of hot water were carried to soften frozen wood, and straw was stuffed into gaps to block the drafts that crept in through stone and timber alike. Inside, the servants' quarters and storerooms were kept busy. The steward, the unseen manager of the castle's daily life, moved constantly between chambers, counting supplies and ensuring that nothing went to waste. Salted meat had to be checked for spoilage, grains protected from damp, and candles rationed carefully. Every resource mattered, every loaf of bread, every stick of firewood. The success of winter survival depended on vigilance. In the workshops, craftsmen continued their trades as best they could. The blacksmith worked near his forge, the glow of his fire cutting through the dim, smoky air. Sparks flew as he mended tools, repaired iron fittings, and shaped small items for daily use. The weavers spun wool into thick yarn, their looms clicking steadily, filling the cold air with rhythm and purpose. The seamstresses stitched garments, repairing old cloaks and fashioning new ones for when the thaw would come. For many, winter also became a time of learning and reflection. The Lord's children received lessons from the castle tutor, reading Latin texts, practicing writing with ink that froze if left too long uncovered. Mathematics, history, and scripture filled their days, while outside snow piled high against the windows. Education was a privilege reserved for the few, yet within those lessons a sense of continuity endured. It was a way to prepare the next generation for the duties and burdens of rule. The ladies of the castle often gathered in warmer chambers, working on embroidery or fine needlework by candlelight. Their hands moved delicately, creating intricate patterns of silk and gold thread that would later decorate garments or church vestments. Conversation filled the hours. News from distant lands, stories of past winters, prayers for loved ones away in battle or pilgrimage. These small circles of companionship wove threads not just of cloth but of connection and hope. Religious observance also shaped the rhythm of winter days. The chapel, though cold and echoing, was the spiritual heart of the castle. Bells marked the hours of prayer, and the chaplain led daily services to remind all that faith could outlast the cold. Candles flickered before stone altars, their light reflecting off gilded icons. During the harshest nights, when storms howled outside and snow beat against the walls, people gathered there seeking solace in chants and whispered prayers. Children, too, found ways to endure the season. They played simple games indoors, rolling wooden hoops, playing dice, or pretending to joust with sticks. Their laughter brought warmth to even the gloomiest corners, and though their fingers were often numb with cold, imagination kept their hearts alive. For them, winter was both a hardship and a wonder. Icicles that glistened like glass, snowflakes caught on eyelashes, and the mysterious silence of nights blanketed in white. Meals became moments of gathering and gratitude. Breakfasts were modest, often bread soaked in ale or warm broth. The main meal came at midday when the fires were strongest and work slowed. Stews thick with lentils or barley simmered in cauldrons, filling the hall with savory scents. The Lord's table might see a roasted bird or cured ham, while the servants shared hearty soups flavored with onions and herbs. Their food was simple and bound everyone together in shared endurance. Evenings were times of quiet work and gentle company. Light was precious and candles were few. So many retired early, curling beneath blankets as the fires dimmed. The last to sleep were the guards on the walls, their torches flickering against the night. They watched the dark woods beyond the moat, listening for sounds of wolves or strangers moving through the snow. Their breath rose like smoke, their armor biting cold against the skin. Yet even then, duty was constant. The castle never truly slept. Beyond its walls, winter remained merciless. The peasants who served the castle fared far worse, living in simple wooden huts with thatched roofs heavy under snow. Many relied on the Lord's stores for survival, trading labor for food. When storms broke, messengers braved the drifts to bring news of sickness, famine, or the long-awaited sight of spring birds returning to the bare trees. Inside the castle, each message was received with both relief and fear. for the fate of the countryside reflected the fate of the Lord himself. And so, through long months of darkness and frost, the people of the castle worked, prayed, and endured. The walls may have been stone, but within them beat the fragile, persistent heart of humanity, determined to survive until the first thaw, when the snow would melt and life would begin again. As the long winter months began to wane, a subtle change crept into the rhythm of life within the castle. The air, though still cold, carried a different scent, less of smoke and frost, more of thawing earth and distant rain. Icicles that had hung from the towers for months began to drip, their slow rhythm echoing in the courtyards like the heartbeat of spring. For the people who had endured the endless gray days and freezing nights, these small signs of change brought a quiet, cautious joy. The return of the sun was a spectacle in itself. Light filtered once more through the narrow windows, casting long golden stripes across stone floors that had long been cloaked in shadow. The castle seemed to breathe again, its corridors warmer, its halls livelier. Servants who once hurried silently through dim chambers now moved with renewed energy. The fires still burned, but no longer with desperate urgency. They were now companions of comfort rather than guardians of life. With the first thaw, attention turned to preparation. The castle's stores were examined carefully to assess what had lasted through the cold. Empty barrels, cracked pottery, and worn tools bore witness to the long struggle. The steward noted every shortage, every ration spent, every item that needed replacing. The blacksmith's forge blazed again with fresh vigor, repairing plows and horseshoes for the coming season. The smell of hot iron and ash filled the crisp air, a sign that work and life was beginning anew. In the courtyards, melting snow revealed the cobblestones beneath, slick with mud but full of promise. The stable hands led the horses out into the light for the first time in months, brushing away the winter's dust from their coats. Their snorts and restless steps echoed against the walls, a reminder that strength and motion would soon return to the land. The castle gardeners, too, emerged from their long dormancy. They inspected the frozen soil, clearing away dead leaves and broken branches. The first seeds were prepared, though planting would still have to wait until the ground fully softened. The faint hope of green stirred in every heart, for spring was not just a change of weather, it was renewal, both physical and spiritual. Inside, the mood transformed. Laughter returned to the halls. Music once again drifted from the great hall, and talk of future hunts, markets, and festivals filled the air. The noble family began planning their journeys, to nearby towns, to court, or to the countryside estates long neglected during winter. Letters were written and sealed, messages sent out with riders now able to travel the muddy roads. The world was opening again. The servants, though still burdened with labor, found relief in the lengthening days. They scrubbed and cleaned, sweeping out the soot that clung to ceilings and the grime of months spent enclosed. Walls were washed, tapestries shaken, and rushes replaced. It was a ritual as old as the castles themselves, banishing the darkness of winter both literally and symbolically. The scent of fresh straw and soap replaced the heavy smoke that had lingered for so long. For the people of the castle, the end of winter brought not just warmth but reflection. Many had fallen ill during the cold months, and not all had survived. The chapel bells rang for those lost to fever or hunger, their names whispered in prayer. Each year's winter left its mark, both on the castle walls and on the hearts of those who lived within them. Yet in their endurance there was also pride, a deep sense of having faced nature's hardest trial and survived. The lord of the castle would walk the battlements gazing out at the thawing landscape. Streams ran again where once there was only ice, and distant smoke rose from the peasant cottages beyond the walls. It was a view that carried both relief and responsibility. Soon, it would be time to restore order to the lands, to collect rents, to oversee planting, to ensure that the coming year would not bring hunger again. The turning of the seasons was more than weather. It was the rhythm of power, life, and duty. The lady of the castle turned her attention to renewal within. Clothes were mended or replaced, the household accounts reviewed, and preparations made for upcoming feasts. Religious festivals like Easter approached, a celebration not only of faith but of the earth's rebirth. Flowers gathered from the first thaw would soon decorate the chapel, their scent filling the air as choirs sang praises of light conquering darkness. For the children, spring was pure wonder. After months confined indoors, they ran through the muddy courtyards, laughing as they chased each other beneath dripping eaves. Their games echoed off the walls, a music more joyful than any harp or lute. They built small boats from wood scraps and floated them on puddles left by melting snow, imagining grand adventures beyond the castle walls. And yet, even as warmth returned, the lessons of winter lingered. People remembered the hunger, the endless nights, the biting wind that crept through every crack in the stone. They remembered how cooperation had saved them, how firewood gathered, food shared, and prayers whispered together had carried them through. In those memories was the wisdom of survival. That strength alone could not defeat the cold, but unity and patience could. As the days grew longer and the castle basked once again in sunlight, the people who lived within its walls emerged transformed. Winter had tested them, as it always did, but it had also bound them together. The lord, the servant, the craftsman, and the child. All had endured the same frost, shared the same fires, and looked to the same horizon, where the first green shoots now rose from the earth. And so life continued in its ancient circle. The castle that had once echoed with the crackle of frozen firewood, now filled with birdsong. The chill that haunted the corridors faded into memory. But even as the warmth of spring returned, the people knew that another winter would come, and when it did, they would be ready once more. As spring unfolded fully and life returned to the land, the great castles of medieval Europe stood once more as living monuments, half fortress, half home. Their gray walls, darkened by the smoke of countless winters, gleamed faintly in the new sunlight. The sound of hammers, laughter, and hooves replaced the long silence of frost. Yet within the hearts of those who lived there lingered the quiet memory of winter's weight, a reminder of both fragility and strength. Through every passing season, the castle was more than stone and mortar. It was the center of a small world. Within its gates, lives intertwined across class and purpose. The noble lord whose decisions shaped destinies, the lady whose care maintained the rhythm of daily life, the servants who labored unseen, and the children who grew beneath the watchful eyes of both faith and duty. All of them shared the same air, the same fire, and the same winter cold. Those long, harsh months had a way of equalizing souls. When the blizzards howled outside and frost crept over the windows, rank mattered less than the shared warmth of survival. A servant feeding the hearth kept the same fire alive that warmed the Lord's hall. A guard patrolling the ramparts in the dark kept watch over all within, noble and peasant alike. Beneath the surface of hierarchy lay a quiet understanding. In winter, every hand mattered. Every life carried its own weight in the balance of endurance. Winter had always been a teacher. It stripped away luxury, leaving only necessity. It revealed the truth of human life, how deeply people depended on one another, how much strength could be found in community. It was easy to forget, in the abundance of summer, that survival was a shared art. But when the snow fell and the fires burned low, the lesson returned. To live, one must work, care, and endure together. For the people of the Middle Ages, the seasons shaped the rhythm of their souls. Spring was hope, summer was labor, autumn was preparation, and winter was faith. Each had its own trials, but none tested the spirit as winter did. The cold months forged patience, discipline, and gratitude. They reminded people that life was not merely about comfort, but about persistence. The castle itself stood as a symbol of that persistence. Built from earth and stone, carved by hands that would never see its completion, it defied time and nature. Storms battered its walls, fires burned in its halls, and yet it remained, a silent witness to generations who lived, loved, and endured within its embrace. The thick walls that once trapped the cold also preserved memory. Every crack and mark held stories, of laughter and loss, of feasts and famines, of survival carved into the very bones of the place. On quiet evenings, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned gold, the castle would glow with a soft warmth. Smoke curled gently from chimneys. Bells rang from the chapel tower, and the people within settled into the calm of another day's end. There was peace in that stillness, the kind that comes only after struggle. The fire's crackle, once a desperate sound of survival, now whispered comfort. The knowledge of winter's trials made the return of light all the sweeter. Every meal shared, every laugh around the hearth, every prayer offered in the chapel, carried deeper meaning. The people knew that joy was precious because it was fleeting, and warmth was sacred because it had been earned. Generations later, when the world changed and the castles themselves fell silent, some to ruin, others to memory, their stories remained. Travelers walking among broken towers and moss-covered stones could still feel it, the echo of footsteps on frozen floors, the faint whisper of wind through narrow halls, the invisible breath of lives once lived in rhythm with the turning of the seasons. The great question, how did people live in medieval castles during the coldest winters, has no single answer. They lived with courage, with faith, with patience. They suffered, but they also celebrated. They built fires against the dark and shared warmth when they had little to give. In their endurance, they revealed something timeless about the human spirit, the will to keep going no matter how cold the world becomes. So as the camera drifts once more through the silent corridors, across empty courtyards and crumbling battlements, imagine the life that once filled them, the laughter echoing through the great hall, the hiss of wood on the fire, the whisper of prayers rising into the stone vaults. Imagine the faces lit by flickering light, gazing out across the frozen fields beyond the walls. And know that for every winter they endured, there was always a spring that followed, just as there always will be. The castles stand as monuments not just to kings and wars, but to endurance itself. They remind us that strength is not only in walls or weapons, but in the quiet resilience of ordinary people who faced the cold, the dark, and the endless passage of time, and still found reason to hope. The fire burns low, the wind grows still, and the story of those who lived within these walls fades once again into silence. But their spirit remains eternal as stone, steady as the seasons and warm as the memory of light returning after the longest night.